The puppy had been standing there since sunrise, balanced on its hind legs in the middle of a desolate highway, paws tucked against its chest like a prayer. No houses for miles. No shade. Just blistering asphalt and a tiny tricolored body trembling with exhaustion. When the car slowed, the puppy didn't run. It locked eyes with the driver and held that impossible pose, the kind of desperation that doesn't look away, doesn't give up, doesn't let you pretend you didn't see. He wasn't supposed to stop. He had a flight to catch, a lease that banned pets, and 100 reasons to keep driving. And for a moment, he didn't break. But something about the way this stray stood there, begging with its entire body, made him pull over. What he found when he got closer wasn't just a hungry puppy. It was barely breathing, covered in parasites, and hiding a secret that would later trigger a legal battle, a viral phenomenon, and a discovery no one, least of all him, saw coming. What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was something else entirely. Elias had been driving for 6 hours straight when the mirage started to look like everything else. Heat waves bent the horizon into liquid silver. Sagebrush blurred past in dusty streaks. Mile marker 42 came and went without ceremony, just another number on a road that felt like it would never end.
He almost didn't see it.
At first, it looked like a stone.
Dark.
Motionless. Sitting dead center in his lane about 50 yards ahead. His foot moved toward the brake out of habit, eyes narrowing against the glare, and that's when the stone moved. Not much. Just a slight shift of weight. A tilt of something small and alive. Elias's heart kicked. He slowed to a crawl, close enough now to make out the shape. A puppy, no bigger than a loaf of bread, sitting upright in a way that didn't look natural. Its front paws were tucked tight against its chest. Its hind legs were planted firm on the scorching asphalt.
And it was staring directly at him.
Not past him. At him. The puppy didn't bolt when the car stopped 10 feet away. It didn't cower or bark. It just stood there on its hind legs, holding that strange, deliberate pose, and watched Elias through the windshield with eyes that were too focused, too knowing for an animal that should have been running for its life. This wasn't a lost dog wandering the road. This was a dog waiting for someone to find it. And somehow, Elias knew it had been waiting all day. Elias opened the door, and the heat hit him like a furnace blast. The puppy finally dropped to all fours, and that's when he saw the limp, a dragging right hind leg that barely touched the ground as the tiny creature hobbled 2 steps closer, then stopped. Up close, it was worse than he'd imagined. The puppy's ribs pressed against its skin like xylophone keys. Its coat, a patchwork of black, tan, and white, was matted with dust and dried blood. Dark swollen ticks clustered around its ears and neck like grotesque ornaments. When it opened its mouth to pant, the tongue was pale gray instead of pink, the unmistakable sign of severe dehydration. Elias crouched down, and the puppy lifted those front paws again, balancing shakily on 3 legs. The brown eyes locked onto his. There was no aggression there, no fear, just a raw, pleading recognition that seemed to say, "You see me. Please don't look away." He checked his watch. 2 hours until his flight from Las Vegas. His apartment lease explicitly banned pets. He'd signed the clause 3 times. His brother was getting married tomorrow. He had a suit in the trunk and exactly 0 room in his life for complications. But when Elias looked past the puppy toward the endless ribbon of highways stretching into the shimmering distance, he saw the truth with brutal clarity. No cars had passed in 20 minutes. The nearest town was 40 miles back. The sun was still climbing towards peak. If he left this dog here, it wouldn't last until sunset. Elias reached down slowly. The puppy didn't flinch. It leaned into his hand, and he felt how hot the small skull was beneath his palm. Fever hot, baked by hours of waiting under the merciless sky. The decision was already made. For the first 10 miles, the puppy sat on the passenger seat wrapped in Elias's spare shirt, panting heavily but alert. Elias kept one hand on the wheel, the other pouring bottled water into his cupped palm every few minutes, letting the small pink tongue lap weakly at the offering. Then, just past mile marker 52, the panting stopped. Elias glanced over. The puppy had gone completely still, eyes half closed, chest barely moving. He pressed 2 fingers against the tiny ribcage and felt the heartbeat, rapid, irregular, fluttering like a trapped bird.
No.
No, 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 stay with me. He slammed the accelerator down. His phone's GPS showed a veterinary clinic in Boulder Creek, 50 miles northwest. 50 miles of winding two-lane highway with no cell signal and a dying animal gasping in shallow, labored breaths beside him. Elias talked the entire way. Nonsense, mostly. Promises he had no right to make. The puppy's breathing grew thinner, each inhale a desperate rattle. The clinic was a converted ranch house, with peeling white paint. Elias burst through the door carrying the limp bundle, and a gray-haired woman in scrubs took one look and pointed him to the back. 20 minutes later, the vet emerged from the examination room with an expression Elias had learned to recognize in emergency rooms, the look that precedes bad news delivered gently. He's stable. For now. She pulled off her gloves. But it's not just dehydration and malnutrition. Your dog has dilated cardiomyopathy, an advanced heart condition. His heart muscle is failing. How advanced? Surgery level advanced. We're talking $12,000 to $15,000. Maybe more. She met his eyes. Most people don't do that for strays. I'm sorry. Elias looked through the doorway at the small shape on the metal table, hooked 2 and 4, still fighting. Then I guess I'm not most people. By midnight, Elias had maxed out one credit card on emergency stabilization treatments and was staring at an estimate for surgery that made his stomach drop. The vet had been blunt. Without the procedure within 2 weeks, the puppy, Bones, as Elias had started calling him in his head, wouldn't see his first birthday. He sat in the clinic's dim waiting room, watching Bones sleep in the recovery kennel, and pulled out his phone. The dashcam footage was still there. 30 seconds of a tiny tricolored puppy standing upright on a deserted highway, paws pressed together, staring directly into the camera with those haunting brown eyes. Elias added a caption. He stood on that road for hours, begging every car that passed. When I stopped, I found out why he was fighting so hard to live. Now he needs surgery he'll never get as a stray. Please share. He posted it at 12:47 a.m. and set the phone down, expecting nothing. By sunrise, it had 40,000 views. By noon, 2 million. The comments flooded in faster than he could read them. Strangers were crying, sharing, tagging friends. Someone created a fundraiser. News outlets were requesting interviews. The phrase, "the puppy that asked for its life back," spread like wildfire across platforms. Within 18 hours, the video had been viewed over 15 million times. The donations poured in, $5, $50, hundreds from people who'd never met Bones but couldn't forget the way he stood on that empty road. By the end of the second day, the surgery was fully funded with thousands to spare. Elias sat beside Bones's kennel, scrolling through messages from across the world, and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about one stray anymore. The world had seen what he saw on mile marker 42, and they weren't looking away either. The email arrived 3 days after the surgery was scheduled. Subject line: I think I know that dog. A woman named Teresa from Flagstaff had sent a photo, a grainy, weathered, lost dog, poster stapled to a telephone pole. The image quality was terrible, faded by sun and rain, but the markings were unmistakable. Same tricolored pattern. Same white chest blaze. Same soulful brown eyes. The poster was dated 4 months earlier. From Albuquerque, New Mexico. Elias stared at his phone, doing the math. Albuquerque to mile marker 42 in the Mojave was over 400 miles. How does a puppy, especially one with a heart condition, travel that distance? Teresa connected him with the original owners, an elderly couple named the Hendersons. They were devastated to see Bones alive but confused. They'd lost him from their fenced backyard in March. No break-ins. No open gates. Just gone. Then the neighbor came forward. A man named Dale Pritchett, who'd been served an eviction notice by the Henderson's son-in-law 2 weeks before the puppy vanished. Security footage from a gas station in Gallup, New Mexico, halfway between Albuquerque and the Mojave, showed Pritchett's truck at 3 a.m. with something small moving in the truck bed. The pieces assembled themselves into a sick picture. Revenge theft. A 400-mile dump. A puppy left to die in the desert as payback for a property dispute. Bones hadn't gotten lost. He'd been thrown away. Elias looked down at the small dog sleeping peacefully in the kennel, for tube still taped to his foreleg, and felt rage coil in his gut. Bones had stood on that highway because he'd been taught to trust humans, to wait for help, to believe someone would come. Even after being abandoned in the worst possible way, he'd still had faith. That faith had saved his life. The surgery was supposed to be a gamble. Dr. Liz, the cardiac specialist who'd flown in from Phoenix, gave Bones a 60% survival rate and warned Elias that recovery could take months, if it happened at all. But Bones didn't read the statistics. 3 days post-op he was standing. 5 days he was eating on his own. By the end of week 2, Dr. Liz was shaking her head in disbelief, reviewing scans that showed heart function improving at a rate she'd never seen in a case this severe. "It's like his body remembered how to be healthy," she said, tracing the imaging with her finger. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I don't have an explanation." Elias had one. Bones wasn't ready to quit. The transformation wasn't just physical. The trembling, exhausted creature who'd barely moved in those first desperate hours became something entirely different. Bones followed Elias everywhere, to the bathroom, the kitchen, the parking lot. If Elias sat down, Bones was in his lap within seconds. If Elias stood, Bones was pressed against his leg, tail wagging, eyes bright with an almost manic devotion. The timid, begging stray had become a Velcro dog who played with ferocious joy, stealing socks and pouncing on shadows like they'd personally offended him. He learned his name in 2 days. Learned sit in 3. Learned that Elias's morning alarm meant it was time to launch onto the bed and lick his face until he got up. But what struck Elias most was the way Bones watched him, not with a pleading desperation from the highway, but with absolute trust. Like he'd decided, somewhere in that broken heart of his, that this human was his human. And nothing was going to change that. The letter arrived on a Thursday, delivered by certified mail. A law firm out of Albuquerque representing the Henderson family's claim to their property. A dog they'd failed to microchip, failed to properly secure, and failed to search for beyond stapling a few posters around their neighborhood. But now, with Bones' story reaching 20 million views and interview requests coming from morning talk shows, the Hendersons wanted him back. Elias read the letter 3 times, hands shaking. They weren't even pretending it was about love. The language was cold, transactional. Substantial emotional damages. Unlawful retention of valuable property. Immediate return required. Valuable. They'd called him valuable. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rita Valdez, didn't sugarcoat it. They have legal standing. The dog was never officially surrendered or declared abandoned. And New Mexico law is frustratingly clear. If they can prove prior ownership, you're in trouble. They let him get stolen and dumped 400 miles away. Negligence isn't the same as relinquishment. Not legally. Rita leaned forward. But here's what we do have. You paid for life-saving surgery they never would have funded. You have documentation of his condition when found. And we have a very compelling public narrative about who actually saved this dog's life. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Until then, Bones stayed with Elias, but the threat hung over every moment like a blade. Every time Bones curled up beside him, every walk, every game of tug-of-war felt like it could be the last. Elias watched Bones sleep one night, paw twitching in dreams, and made a promise to the small shape breathing steadily against his ribs. "They're not taking you. I don't care what it costs." Bones sighed in his sleep, trusting completely. That trust was about to be tested in court. The day before the hearing, Dr. Liz insisted on one final checkup. "Standard procedure," she said, documenting Bones' current health for the legal record. Elias sat in the examination room, watching Bones charm every technician who walked past, while Dr. Liz ran her scanner over his shoulder blades. She froze. "There's a microchip." Elias's stomach dropped.
What?
The Hendersons said he wasn't chipped. "He is," Dr. Liz's face had gone pale. And it's not theirs. The registration pulled up an organization called Desert Star Service Dogs, based in Tucson. The contact listed was a woman named Sarah Caldwell. Rita was on speakerphone within minutes, frantically taking notes while Dr. Liz read the details aloud. Sarah Caldwell answered on the second ring. Bones, originally named Apollo, had been bred from a line of award-winning medical alert dogs. At 6 months old, he'd been matched with a 7-year-old girl named Mia who had severe epilepsy. The dog was being trained to detect her seizures before they happened, a skill that could save her life. Then, 3 months into training, Apollo vanished from the service dog facility's yard. Someone had cut the fence. The theft was reported, but with no leads and hundreds of miles to search, the case went cold. Sarah's voice cracked over the phone. Mia's had 2 emergency room visits since we lost him. Her parents are devastated. They'd already bonded. Elias looked down at Bones, who was sitting perfectly still, head tilted, as if he understood every word. This wasn't just a stolen pet. This was a lifeline that had been ripped away from a sick child, and somehow, against impossible odds, had survived long enough to be found. The question now was, found by whom? The judge ruled in Elias's favor. The Hendersons had no microchip, no proof of purchase, and overwhelming evidence of negligence. Desert Star had the chip, but couldn't prove continuous care. Legally, Bones belonged to the man who'd saved his life. Elias sat in the courtroom, Rita squeezing his shoulder in congratulation, and felt nothing but weight. That night, he drove to Tucson. Mia was smaller than he'd imagined, curled in a hospital bed with monitors beeping softly beside her. Her parents stood when Elias entered, faces cautious and tired. He'd brought Bones, Apollo, wrapped in a blanket. The moment the little girl saw him, her face transformed. Bones wiggled free and went straight to her, pressing his head against her palm with that same deliberate gentleness Elias had seen on the desert road. He remembers, Sarah Caldwell whispered. Elias stayed for an hour, watching Bones work. The way he positioned himself beside Mia. The way he nudged her hand minutes before her monitor alarmed. The way she smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months, according to her parents. When Elias left, Bones stayed. But the story didn't end there. 6 months later, Bones, now a fully certified therapy dog, split his time between Mia's home and a new facility in Boulder Creek. Elias had used the remaining donated funds to open Desert Heart Sanctuary, a rescue and rehabilitation center for abandoned animals found on rural highways. And once a week, Bones visited children's hospitals across Nevada and Arizona. The puppy who'd once begged strangers on a lonely road now begged for hugs from sick kids, standing on his hind legs with paws pressed together, a gesture that had saved his life and now brought joy to dozens of children who needed it most. Elias watched from the doorway as Bones performed his signature move for a boy in a wheelchair and smiled. Some dogs save one life. Bones saved them all. Right now, there are thousands of animals waiting on roads just like mile marker 42.
Starving.
Abandoned. Hoping that just one person will slow down instead of driving past. Most people keep driving. Elias almost did too. He had every reason to, a flight to catch, a lease that said no pets, a life that had no room for complications. But he stopped. And because he stopped, Bones didn't just survive. He became a lifeline for children who needed hope as desperately as he once needed water. If this story moved you, don't just watch and scroll. Share it. Let it reach someone who's about to drive past their own mile marker 42. Subscribe so you'll see the next rescue story we share, because every view, every share, every comment helps us reach people who have the power to save a life but don't know it yet. Comment below and tell us, would you have stopped? Because here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Somewhere today, an animal is standing in a road, begging for someone to notice. And whether they live or die might depend on whether someone like you decides that 3 minutes of inconvenience is worth a lifetime of difference. Bones stood on that highway because he believed someone good still existed. Prove him right.